The rain fell like 1,000 silent prayers over Kyoto, washing the cobblestones of the narrow alley where honor and violence were about to collide. It was the kind of night when decent people stayed indoors, when lanterns were extinguished early, and when the darkness between buildings became a hunting ground for those who had abandoned the way of righteousness. Kenji walked through that darkness without fear, though he had every reason to be afraid. He was a Ronin, a masterless samurai, a man whose lord had fallen in battle 3 years prior. The shame of survival while his master perished had carved deep lines into his face, lines that made him appear older than his 32 years. His kimono was faded and patched, his sandals worn thin, and the katana at his side was the only possession he owned that still held any true value. He had not drawn that blade in over a year. Violence had become something he avoided, not from cowardice, but from the understanding that each life taken was a debt added to a ledger already impossibly heavy. He moved through the world like a ghost, taking work where he could find it, sleeping in temples when the monks would have him, and fasting when they would not. Tonight he had been walking toward the outer district where a merchant had promised him 3 days of work loading rice barrels. It was not dignified labor for a samurai, even a masterless one, but dignity was a luxury Kenji had learned to live without. What mattered now was survival, and perhaps, in some small way, atonement for the failure that haunted his every breath. The sound reached him before the sight did. A woman's cry, sharp and desperate, cut through the curtain of rain. Then another voice, younger, but equally terrified. Kenji's hand moved instinctively to the hilt of his katana, his body responding to years of training, even as his mind hesitated. He had promised himself no more violence, no more death, but the cries came again, and something deeper than thought propelled him forward. He turned the corner into a wider street, where paper lanterns swung wildly in the wind, their light casting frantic shadows against wooden walls. There, beneath the awning of a closed tea-house, he saw them. 2 women, young and beautiful, dressed in the elaborate kimono of Geisha. Their faces were painted white, their lips crimson, their hair adorned with ornamental pins that glittered even in the dim light. But their beauty was being violated by ugliness. 5 men surrounded them, rough-looking Ronin or bandits, their faces twisted with drink and cruel intent. One man had grabbed the taller of the 2 women by the wrist, while another was reaching for her sister. The taller woman struggled, her eyes fierce despite the terror. The shorter one, her sister, clearly pressed close to her, trembling but defiant. They were perhaps 23 years old, both of them, twins perhaps, or close in age. There was a resemblance in the shape of their faces, the curve of their cheekbones, the way they stood together even in fear. "Please," the taller sister said, her voice steady despite everything. "We are under the protection of Lord Takeda. If you harm us, his vengeance will be terrible." The largest of the bandits laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Lord Takeda is 3 days' ride from here, girl, and by the time he hears what happened to his pretty songbirds, we'll be drinking in Osaka." His hand moved toward her face, and that was when Kenji stepped into the light. "Let them go." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. The 5 men turned toward him, and for a moment the only sound was the rain drumming on the wooden awning above. The large bandit assessed Kenji with the quick calculation of a man used to violence. He saw the worn clothes, the thin frame, the single katana. He saw someone who looked like easy prey. "Walk away, beggar," the bandit said. "This doesn't concern you." Kenji took another step forward. His hand remained on his katana, but he had not yet drawn it. "I will say it once more. Let them go." The shorter sister's eyes met his for just a moment, and in that glance Kenji saw something that struck him deeper than any blade. Not just fear, but hope. She believed he could save them. She believed in him, though she did not know his name, did not know his story, did not know that he was a man who had failed everyone who ever depended on him. The large bandit released the taller sister's wrist and turned fully toward Kenji. "You want to die for 2 women you don't even know?" Kenji's response was to draw his katana in one smooth, perfect motion. The blade sang as it cleared the scabbard, and the sound seemed to silence even the rain. The steel caught the lantern light, and for just a moment it looked less like a weapon and more like a line of moonlight given solid form. "I have already died," Kenji said softly. "What you see before you is merely the ghost of a samurai who failed to die with honor. But even a ghost can still cut." The bandit's face twisted with rage, and he drew his own blade, a crude, poorly maintained weapon that spoke of a man who had never studied the true way of the sword. The other 4 men spread out, encircling Kenji. They moved with the coordination of a pack, and Kenji understood immediately that they had done this before. They were not honorable warriors. They were predators. The first attack came from behind, a clumsy overhead strike meant to split his skull. Kenji moved without thinking, sidestepping and bringing his katana up in a rising arc. The bandit's blade met empty air, and Kenji's sword opened a red line across the man's chest, not deep enough to kill, but enough to send him stumbling backward with a scream. The second and third came together from opposite sides, a scissoring attack. Kenji dropped low, letting their blades pass over his head, then surged upward with a thrust that caught the second man in the shoulder. The third man overextended, and Kenji's pommel struck him in the temple, dropping him unconscious to the wet stones. 3 down, 2 remaining. The large bandit and one other circled now with more caution, their earlier confidence shattered. They had realized too late that the shabby Ronin before them was not prey but a predator of an entirely different order. "Who are you?" the large bandit demanded, his voice now edged with fear. Kenji did not answer. He had no name worth speaking. He was no one, a shadow, a failure. But his blade was still sharp, and the training of his youth still lived in his muscles. The remaining bandits attacked together, a desperate rush. Kenji met them with the fluidity of water and the precision of lightning. His katana moved in arcs and lines that his old master would have recognized, techniques passed down through generations, the true art of the sword that separated a samurai from a common killer. When it was over, the large bandit lay clutching a wound in his side, and the last man was running, his sword abandoned on the ground. The 3 wounded groaned or lay still. None were dead, though Kenji could have killed them all. He had chosen not to. That was the only choice he still had control over. He stood in the rain, breathing hard, his katana still drawn and dripping with rainwater and blood. For a moment, he did not move, could not move, because the violence had awakened something in him he had tried to bury. The clarity, the terrible, pure clarity of combat, where there was no past and no future, only the perfect present moment of life and death. Then he heard a soft sound and turned. The 2 sisters stood where the bandits had left them, huddled together beneath the awning. The taller one had her arm around her sister, but both were staring at Kenji with expressions he could not quite read. Fear, yes, but also something else. Gratitude, wonder, and beneath it all, a curiosity that seemed to glow in their dark eyes, like embers in ash. Kenji slowly sheathed his katana and bowed to them, a deep, formal bow that acknowledged their status and his own unworthiness. "Forgive me for the violence you had to witness," he said quietly. "I will go now. Please, find safety quickly. More may come." He turned to leave, but a voice stopped him. "Wait." It was the taller sister who spoke. Her voice was like water over stones, cultured and careful. She stepped forward, her sister following close behind, and for the first time Kenji saw them clearly. They were indeed twins, or so close in age and appearance that the difference did not matter. Both stood at the same height. Both had the same oval faces and delicate features. The taller one, who had spoken, had eyes that held a quiet strength, a determination that reminded Kenji of cherry trees that bloomed even in the harshest winter. The shorter one, though only by an inch perhaps, had eyes that were softer, more open, and in them Kenji saw a gentleness that seemed impossibly fragile in a world as cruel as this one. "You saved our lives," the taller sister continued. "We are in your debt." Kenji shook his head. "There is no debt. I did only what anyone with a blade should have done." "But no one else did," the shorter sister said, her voice almost a whisper. "Many walked past. Many heard us cry out. Only you stopped." Kenji had no answer for that. He knew the truth of the world, knew that most people turned away from suffering because to witness it was to become responsible for it. He had done the same many times. But tonight, for reasons he could not name, he had not been able to walk away. "What is your name?" the taller sister asked. He hesitated. Names had power. Names created connections, and connections led to pain. "I am no one," he said finally. "A Ronin without a master, without a home. My name does not matter." The shorter sister stepped closer, and Kenji could smell the faint scent of cherry blossoms from her hair. "Everyone has a name," she said gently. "Even ghosts." He looked at her, and for a moment, something in his chest tightened painfully. When had someone last looked at him with such kindness? When had anyone seen him as something more than a failure, a wanderer, a blade for hire? "Kenji," he said, the word pulled from him, almost against his will. "My name is Kenji," the taller sister bowed, a graceful motion that seemed to contain centuries of refinement. "I am Hana," she said. Then she gestured to her sister. "And this is Yuki. We are Geisha in the house of Lord Takeda." At the mention of the daimyo's name, Kenji felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Lord Takeda was a powerful man, a feudal lord whose territory encompassed 3 provinces. His reputation was that of a shrewd and sometimes ruthless leader, a man who valued loyalty above all and punished betrayal with swift and terrible justice. "Then you should return to your lord's protection immediately," Kenji said. "These streets are not safe." "Our escort was killed when the bandits attacked," Hana said quietly. "We were on our way back from a performance when they ambushed us. We have nowhere to go until morning, when the household will send guards to search for us." Kenji understood the problem immediately. 2 geisha alone on the streets of Kyoto at night, even under a daimyo's protection, were targets. But for him to escort them would be to risk association, to become involved in the affairs of the powerful. Every instinct told him to walk away, to return to his anonymous existence. But when he looked at Yuki, at the hope and trust still shining in her eyes, he found he could not do it. "There is a temple 1 street over," he said. "The monks there know me. They will give you shelter until morning." Hana and Yuki exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them. Then Hana nodded. "We will follow you." And so Kenji walked through the rain-soaked streets of Kyoto, with 2 geisha behind him, his hand never far from his katana, his senses alert for any sign of danger. They moved quickly and quietly, 3 shadows slipping through the darkness. The temple was small, dedicated to Kannon, the goddess of mercy. The monks who tended it were old and kind, men who had seen enough of the world to judge no one. When Kenji knocked on the wooden gate and explained the situation, the head monk, a man named Ryotaro with a face like weathered stone, simply nodded and opened the gate wider. "All are welcome in the house of mercy," Ryotaro said. He looked at Kenji with eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the soul beneath. "Especially those who walk through rain to bring others to safety." Hana and Yuki were led inside, and Kenji prepared to leave. His duty was done. They were safe. He could return to his empty existence, his eternal wandering, his search for a redemption he would never find. But as he turned to go, Yuki's voice called out to him once more. "Kenji-san." He stopped but did not turn around. "Will we see you again?" The question hung in the air like the last note of a song. Kenji wanted to say no, wanted to sever this connection before it could take root, but instead he found himself saying, "Perhaps, if the gods will it." Then he walked back into the rain, leaving the temple and its warm light behind. He did not know, could not know, that the next morning would bring not gratitude, but a reckoning that would change all of their lives forever. Because Lord Takeda was already on his way to Kyoto, and with him rode judgment as sharp and final as any blade. Dawn came to Kyoto with the reluctance of a secret being revealed. The rain had stopped sometime before sunrise, leaving the city washed clean and glittering with moisture. Kenji had not slept. He had found shelter in an abandoned storehouse near the river, where he sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, his katana laid across his lap, his mind turning over the events of the previous night. He had broken his vow, not the vow to avoid violence, for that had been necessary and just, but the deeper vow, the one he had made to himself 3 years ago when his lord fell and he survived, the vow to remain apart, to touch no other lives, to leave no mark upon the world that might lead to more suffering. By saving Hana and Yuki, he had connected himself to them, and through them to the web of power and obligation that surrounded all who served a daimyo. He knew how these things worked. Lord Takeda would want to know who had saved his geisha. He would want to reward Kenji, or perhaps question him, or perhaps both. And in that questioning, in that attention, Kenji's carefully maintained anonymity would shatter. He should leave Kyoto. He should disappear into the countryside, find another nameless town where he could fade back into the background of life. But something kept him sitting in that cold storehouse, watching the light grow stronger through the gaps in the walls. Something he did not want to name but could feel growing in his chest like a seed breaking through frozen ground. He was thinking of Yuki's eyes, the softness in them, the trust. The sound of horses brought him back to the present. Many horses moving through the streets with the disciplined cadence of trained war horses. Kenji stood and moved to a gap in the wall, peering out at the street below. A procession was passing. At its head rode a man on a black stallion, a figure of such obvious authority that even from a distance, Kenji could feel the weight of his presence. The man wore armor lacquered in deep blue and gold, and at his side hung not one, but two katana, the mark of a samurai of high rank. His face was stern and weathered, perhaps 50 years old, with a thin mustache and eyes that seemed to take in everything and miss nothing. Lord Takeda. It could be no one else. Behind him rode 20 samurai, all armed and armored, their faces set in expressions of professional readiness, and behind them came servants and attendants, including 2 women in the elaborate dress of senior geisha. Kenji's heart sank. The daimyo had come to Kyoto personally. That meant something had happened, something serious enough to draw a feudal lord away from his castle. It meant Hana and Yuki had told him about the attack. Kenji watched the procession pass, heading in the direction of the temple where he had left the sisters. He knew with cold certainty what was about to happen. Lord Takeda would speak with Hana and Yuki, would learn of their rescue, and would demand to meet the Ronin who had touched his property without permission, because that was what the sisters were in the eyes of feudal law: property, valuable assets owned by the daimyo, who paid for their training and their keep. For a masterless samurai to lay hands on them, even to save them, was a breach of protocol that could be interpreted as insult, and insults to a daimyo's honor were paid for in blood. Kenji could still run. He could leave now, disappear into the morning crowds, be gone before Lord Takeda even knew his name. Every practical instinct screamed at him to do exactly that, but his feet did not move. His hand rested on his katana, and he realized with a mixture of resignation and something almost like relief that he was not going to run. If he ran, Hana and Yuki would be questioned about him. They would be pressured to reveal everything they knew. And even though they knew almost nothing, even though he was just a nameless Ronin who had helped them, they would suffer for their association with him. The daimyo's displeasure was not a thing that touched only its direct target. It radiated outward, scorching everything nearby. No, he would not run. He would face whatever judgment came, and he would make sure that judgment fell on him alone. He cleaned his katana carefully, checking the blade for any imperfection, then sheathed it with the ritual precision his old master had taught him. He adjusted his worn kimono as best he could, knowing it made him look like what he was, a Ronin of no account, a man who had fallen far from whatever grace he might once have possessed. Then he walked out of the storehouse and toward the temple, toward whatever fate awaited him there. The streets of Kyoto were coming alive with morning activity. Merchants opened their shops, women carried water from the wells, children ran past with the boundless energy of youth. It was a normal day for them, a day like any other. For Kenji, it might be his last day to see such simple beauty. When he reached the temple, he found it surrounded by Lord Takeda's samurai. They stood at attention, forming a perimeter that no one could cross without permission. Kenji approached directly, making no attempt to hide or evade. One of the samurai, a young man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward to block his path. "State your business," the samurai said, his hand on his katana. "I am Kenji, a Ronin," Kenji said clearly. "I believe Lord Takeda wishes to speak with me." The scarred samurai's eyes widened slightly, and he exchanged a glance with one of his companions. Then he nodded curtly. "Wait here." He disappeared into the temple, and Kenji stood in the morning sun, surrounded by armed men who watched him with the focused alertness of predators. Minutes passed, like hours. Then the scarred samurai returned and gestured for Kenji to follow. "Lord Takeda will see you now. You will show proper respect. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will keep your hand away from your sword. Do you understand?" "I understand," Kenji said. He was led through the temple courtyard, past the main hall where the monks normally chanted their sutras, and into a private chamber that had been commandeered for the daimyo's use. The room was simple but elegant, with tatami mats on the floor and a single scroll hanging on the wall, depicting a crane in flight. Incense burned in a small brazier, filling the air with the scent of sandalwood. Lord Takeda sat on a raised platform at the far end of the room, his posture perfect, his presence filling the space like a physical force. To his right stood Hana and Yuki, both dressed in fresh kimono, their faces once again painted in the traditional style of geisha. They did not look at Kenji when he entered, but he could sense their tension, could feel the worry radiating from them like heat from a flame. Kenji entered and immediately dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the tatami in the deepest form of bow. He remained there, waiting, barely breathing. "Rise." Lord Takeda's voice was like stone grinding against stone, deep and implacable. Kenji sat up, but remained on his knees, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes lowered respectfully. He could feel the daimyo's gaze on him, assessing, measuring, judging. "You are the Ronin called Kenji," Lord Takeda said. It was not a question. "I am, my lord." "You encountered my geisha last night, while they were being attacked." "Yes, my lord." "And you intervened." "Yes, my lord." There was a long silence. Kenji could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the faint rustle of silk as one of the sisters shifted her weight. He kept his eyes down, kept his breathing steady, and waited for the blade to fall. "Look at me," Lord Takeda commanded. Kenji raised his eyes and met the daimyo's gaze. What he saw there was not anger exactly, but something more complex: calculation, curiosity, and beneath it all a deep and abiding sense of control, the absolute certainty of a man who had never questioned his right to command. "These women," Lord Takeda said, gesturing slightly toward Hana and Yuki, "are under my protection. They are my responsibility, and through them I maintain relationships with powerful men in this province and beyond. Their safety, their reputation, their very existence reflects upon my honor. Do you understand this?" "I understand, my lord." "Then you understand that when a stranger, a masterless samurai with no lord and no name, touches them, even to save them, he creates a debt. And debts must be repaid." Kenji felt his chest tighten. Here it was then, the verdict. He had saved 2 lives, and for that, his own would be forfeit. There was a cruel poetry to it, he thought. He had survived when his master died, had lived when honor demanded he take his own life in ritual suicide. Perhaps this was simply the universe's way of correcting that mistake. "I did not seek to insult you, my lord," Kenji said quietly. "I acted only to prevent harm to those who could not defend themselves. If my action has brought shame to your house, I will accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate." Lord Takeda leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You speak well for a Ronin, better than most. Tell me, who was your master?" Kenji hesitated. To speak his former lord's name was to invite more questions, to open doors he had kept locked for 3 years. But to refuse a daimyo's direct question was to invite immediate execution. "Lord Yamamoto of Musashi Province," he said finally. "He fell in battle against the Ikeda clan 3 years ago." Recognition flickered in Lord Takeda's eyes. "Yamamoto. Yes, I heard of that battle. A foolish campaign, born of pride and poor counsel. Many good men died for nothing." He paused. "And you survived." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Kenji said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Yes, he had survived. That was his shame, his burden, his eternal failure. A samurai who survives while his lord dies, Lord Takeda continued, is either a coward or a man of exceptional skill who had no choice. "Which are you, Kenji?" It was a test, Kenji realized. The daimyo was probing, trying to understand what kind of man knelt before him. A wrong answer here could be fatal, but a dishonest answer would be worse. "I am a man who failed to die when he should have," Kenji said. "Whether that makes me a coward or simply unfortunate, I cannot say. I know only that I have lived with that failure every day since." Something changed in Lord Takeda's expression, a slight softening that might have been respect or might have been pity. "And yet you drew your sword last night to save 2 women you did not know. A coward would have walked past." "Perhaps I am simply a man who makes different choices in darkness than he does in daylight." Lord Takeda laughed, a short, sharp sound that seemed to surprise even him. "You have a poet's tongue, Ronin. That is rare." He stood, and immediately everyone in the room tensed. The daimyo walked down from his platform and approached Kenji, stopping just a few feet away. "Here is my verdict," Lord Takeda said, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "You saved the lives of 2 women who are precious to me. You risked your own life to do so, expecting no reward. By the code of Bushido, this is the highest form of selfless action. However, you also touched what belongs to me without permission. You inserted yourself into my affairs without invitation. This cannot go unanswered." Kenji bowed his head, ready for whatever came next. Death, he thought, would at least be an end to wandering. "Therefore," Lord Takeda continued, "I offer you a choice. You may accept my gratitude and a reward of gold, enough to live comfortably for a year, and then you will leave this province and never return. Or you may accept a different payment. You will enter my service as a samurai once again, swear loyalty to my house, and become the personal guardian of these 2 women. You will protect them, serve them, and ensure that no harm ever comes to them again." Kenji's head snapped up in shock. He had expected death or exile, but this was impossible. A daimyo did not simply offer to restore a Ronin to samurai status. That required trust, required faith in a man's honor, and Kenji's honor was a shattered thing. broken beyond repair. "My lord," he began, "I am not worthy of such—" "I did not ask if you were worthy," Lord Takeda interrupted. "I asked you to make a choice. Take the gold and leave, or take the oath and stay. But choose now, because I do not make such offers twice." Kenji looked past the daimyo to where Hana and Yuki stood. For the first time since he entered the room, Yuki met his eyes, and in her gaze he saw something that made his breath catch. Not just gratitude, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like hope, or perhaps the beginning of something that could become hope if given time to grow. He thought of the 3 years he had spent wandering, searching for death or redemption and finding neither. He thought of the emptiness that had consumed him, the sense that he was merely a ghost walking through a world where he no longer belonged. And he thought of last night, of the moment when his blade had moved with purpose, when he had felt, for just a few heartbeats, like a samurai again. "I will take the oath," he said, his voice steady. "I will serve your house and protect these women with my life." Lord Takeda nodded, as if he had expected no other answer. "Then kneel and swear." Kenji bowed deeply, pressing his forehead once more to the tatami. "I, Kenji, formerly of House Yamamoto, do hereby swear loyalty to Lord Takeda and his house. I will serve with honor, protect his interests, and guard the lives of those he values above my own life. I will not falter, I will not fail, and I will not dishonor the trust placed in me. This I swear by my blade, by my blood, and by the memory of my former master. Rise, Kenji of House Takeda." The words sent a shock through Kenji's entire body. He rose slowly, feeling as if the weight of 3 years had suddenly shifted, not lifted entirely, but redistributed into something he could finally carry. Lord Takeda turned to Hana and Yuki. "These are my conditions. Kenji will live in the residence where you stay. He will accompany you to all performances, all engagements, all travel. He will be your shadow and your shield. You will treat him with the respect due to a samurai in my service, and he will treat you with the respect due to your station. Is this understood?" "Yes, my lord," both sisters said in unison, bowing deeply. Lord Takeda turned back to Kenji. "You will be given proper clothing, a stipend, and a room near their quarters. You will report to me monthly on their safety, and on any threats to their well-being. And Kenji," the daimyo's voice dropped lower, taking on an edge like sharpened steel, "if any harm comes to them while they are in your care, you will not die quickly. You will die slowly, painfully, and publicly. Your failure will be known to all. Do you accept these terms?" "I accept them, my lord." "Good." Lord Takeda walked back to his platform and sat once more. "You are dismissed. My steward will see to your arrangements. Report to the residence by nightfall." Kenji bowed and turned to leave, but Hana's voice stopped him. "My lord," she said, addressing Lord Takeda, "may we speak with Kenji-san briefly? To thank him properly?" Lord Takeda waved a hand dismissively. 5 minutes, then he goes with my steward." Kenji was led to a smaller room adjacent to the main chamber, and moments later, Hana and Yuki entered. As soon as the door closed behind them, Yuki rushed forward and dropped to her knees before Kenji, her hands clasped together. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for not running away. Thank you for staying." Kenji stood frozen, unsure how to respond. He had not expected this, had not prepared for raw gratitude from 2 women who had every reason to resent the complication he had brought into their lives. Hana was more composed, but he could see emotion glittering in her eyes as well. "Lord Takeda is a fair man, but he is also a cautious one. He would not have made this offer if he did not see something in you worth preserving. We saw it too last night. We saw a man who still believed in honor, even when the world had given him every reason to abandon it." "I do not deserve such faith," Kenji said quietly. "Perhaps not," Hana replied with a slight smile, "but you have it nonetheless. And now you have a chance to prove whether that faith is justified." Yuki stood, her eyes still wet. "We will be good to you, Kenji-san. We will not make your duty harder than it must be. And perhaps," she hesitated, a blush coloring her painted cheeks, "perhaps we can become friends. Not just protector and protected, but something more." Kenji did not know what to say to that. Friendship seemed like a luxury he had no right to expect. But looking at Yuki's hopeful face, at the way she and her sister stood together, united in their determination to welcome him into their lives, he felt something crack in the armor of ice he had built around his heart. "I would like that," he said, and meant it. The door opened and the steward appeared, a thin man with calculating eyes. "Kenji-san, if you will follow me." Kenji bowed to Hana and Yuki one more time, then followed the steward out into the morning sun. As he walked through the temple courtyard, he allowed himself one glance back. The sisters stood in the doorway watching him go, and Yuki raised her hand in a small, tentative wave. Kenji did not wave back, but he nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement and promise. Then he turned and walked forward into a future he had never imagined possible, a future where he was no longer a ghost, but a man with purpose, with duty, and perhaps, if the gods were kind, with a chance at redemption. But the path ahead would not be easy. Lord Takeda's verdict had saved him from death, but it had also bound him to the two women whose lives he had preserved. And in the world of feudal Japan, where duty and desire were so often at war, where honor demanded sacrifice and love demanded surrender, Kenji would soon discover that some battles could not be won with a sword. The hardest battles, he would learn, were the ones fought in the silent chambers of the heart. The residence where Hana and Yuki lived was not a palace, but it carried the subtle elegance that marked all things connected to Lord Takeda's household. It stood in the eastern district of Kyoto, a two-story structure of dark wood and white walls, surrounded by a garden where cherry trees stood like patient sentinels. A high wooden fence enclosed the property, and at the gate stood two guards who bowed respectfully as Kenji approached with the steward. Inside, the residence was a world unto itself. The rooms were appointed with quiet luxury, tatami mats of the finest quality, sliding doors painted with scenes of mountains and rivers, low tables of polished wood, and alcoves displaying single flowers in ceramic vases. It was the kind of place where every detail had been considered, where beauty was not shouted but whispered. The steward, whose name was Tanaka, led Kenji through the main house and into a smaller wing that overlooked the garden. He stopped before a modest room at the end of a hallway. "This will be your quarters," Tanaka said, sliding open the door. "It is simple but adequate. You will find fresh clothing in the chest, and your meals will be brought to you 3 times daily. The sisters' rooms are on the floor above, accessible by the stairs at the end of this corridor. You are expected to be available at all times, should they require your presence or protection." Kenji entered the room and looked around. It was indeed simple. A sleeping mat rolled in the corner, a small writing desk, a brazier for heat, and a stand for his katana. But after 3 years of sleeping in temples, abandoned buildings, and under bridges, it seemed almost luxurious. "You will present yourself to the sisters after the evening meal," Tanaka continued. "They will explain their schedules and requirements. Until then, you may rest and familiarize yourself with the residence." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "One more thing, Kenji-san. The sisters are Lord Takeda's most prized geisha. Many powerful men seek their company for entertainment at parties and gatherings. Your duty is to ensure their safety, not to interfere with their work. Do you understand the distinction?" "I understand," Kenji said evenly, though the steward's tone carried an unmistakable warning. "Do not become attached. Do not forget your place. Do not confuse protection with possession." Tanaka nodded and departed, leaving Kenji alone in his new room. He stood in the center of the space for a long moment, simply breathing, trying to absorb the reality of what had happened. This morning he had been a nameless Ronin, a ghost wandering through a world that had no place for him. Now he was a samurai again, sworn to a lord, given purpose and duty. But the weight of that duty pressed down on him like a physical thing. He had failed one lord already. If he failed Lord Takeda, if anything happened to Hana and Yuki while they were in his care, there would be no wandering, no second chances. There would only be death, the kind of death that was meant to serve as a lesson to others. Kenji opened the chest and found what Tanaka had promised, 2 sets of kimono in dark blue, the color of Lord Takeda's house, along with hakama, a new obi, and even fresh tabi socks. There was also a haori jacket bearing the Takeda crest, a stylized mountain peak enclosed in a circle. Kenji ran his fingers over the embroidered silk, feeling the quality of the garment, the weight of the symbol it carried. He changed slowly, shedding his worn and patched clothing like a snake shedding old skin. When he tied the obi and adjusted the haori, he caught his reflection in the polished metal of his sword stand. The man looking back at him was still recognizably Kenji, still carried the same weathered face and haunted eyes, but he looked different somehow, more solid, more present, as if by accepting this duty, he had called himself back from the edge of dissolution. The afternoon passed quietly. Kenji explored the residence, memorizing its layout with the tactical mind of a warrior. He noted all the entrances and exits, identified which windows could be secured and which were vulnerable, and observed the patterns of the servants and guards. By the time evening approached, He had committed the entire structure to memory, along with a dozen different defensive strategies for various scenarios. When the sun began to set, painting the garden in shades of amber and crimson, a young servant girl appeared at his door and bowed deeply. "Kenji-sama, the ladies request your presence in the upper sitting room." Kenji followed her up the narrow stairs to the second floor, where she stopped before a sliding door decorated with paintings of cranes in flight. She knocked gently, then slid the door open and gestured for him to enter. The room beyond was larger than his own, elegantly furnished with cushions around a low table. Paper lanterns cast soft light across tatami mats, and in one corner, a brazier burned with sweet-smelling incense. Hana and Yuki sat on opposite sides of the table, and between them was an empty cushion clearly meant for Kenji. Both sisters had changed since the morning. They no longer wore the formal geisha attire, but simpler kimono in complementary shades of pale blue and soft pink. Their faces were clean of the white makeup, revealing natural beauty that was somehow more striking than the painted elegance he had seen before. Hana's face held a quiet intelligence, her eyes sharp and observant. Yuki's features were softer, more open, and when she smiled at Kenji, he felt that strange tightening in his chest again. "Please, Kenji-san, sit with us," Hana said, gesturing to the empty cushion. Kenji entered, bowed formally, and seated himself in the position of a retainer. Back straight, hands folded, eyes respectfully lowered. The sisters exchanged a glance, and Yuki giggled softly. "You need not be so formal," Yuki said gently. "We are not your lords, merely those you have been assigned to protect. Please be comfortable." Kenji relaxed slightly, but maintained proper posture. Old habits, learned under the strict tutelage of his former master, were not easily abandoned. Hana poured tea into 3 cups with practiced grace. "We wanted to speak with you privately, to establish how we will live together. Lord Takeda's command was clear, but the details of our arrangement are for us to determine." She slid a cup toward Kenji, and he accepted it with both hands, noting the quality of the porcelain and the delicate aroma of the green tea. "First," Hana continued, "you should understand our duties. We are geisha in Lord Takeda's service, but we do not serve as common entertainers. We are sent only to the most important gatherings, where powerful daimyo and their advisors meet. We perform, we serve tea, we engage in conversation and poetry. Our purpose is to create an atmosphere of refinement and culture that reflects well upon Lord Takeda's house. And to listen," Yuki added softly. "Men speak freely around geisha, especially when they believe we are merely decorative. Lord Takeda values what we hear and report back to him." Kenji nodded slowly, understanding. The sisters were not just entertainers, but intelligence assets. Their beauty and training used to gather information that could prove valuable in the complex web of feudal politics. It was a dangerous role, one that required them to navigate between powerful men who might see them as prizes to be won or tools to be used. "How often do you attend such gatherings?" Kenji asked. 2 or 3 times each week," Hana replied. "Sometimes together, sometimes separately. The engagements can last several hours, sometimes until late in the night. You will accompany us to each one, remaining nearby, but not visible, unless we signal that we require assistance." "And if someone attempts to claim more than conversation?" Kenji asked carefully. Hana's expression hardened slightly. "It has been attempted before. We are skilled at deflection, at maintaining boundaries without giving offense, but there have been close calls. That is why Lord Takeda decided we needed a dedicated guardian, rather than relying on the general house guards." Yuki leaned forward, her eyes serious despite their gentleness. "There is one man in particular who concerns us. Lord Akimoto, a daimyo from the northern provinces. He is a frequent guest at gatherings we attend, and he has made his interest in us quite clear. Lord Takeda has refused his requests to purchase our contracts, but Lord Akimoto is not a man who accepts refusal gracefully." "Tell me about him," Kenji said. "Everything you know." For the next hour, the sisters briefed Kenji on the various players in Kyoto's political landscape. They spoke of alliances and rivalries, of which lords were trustworthy and which were known for treachery, of the subtle signs that indicated when a gathering might turn dangerous. They spoke with intelligence and precision, and Kenji realized that beneath their beauty and grace, both Hana and Yuki possessed sharp minds that had been trained to observe and analyze. As they talked, Kenji found himself studying them more closely. Hana was clearly the more pragmatic of the two, the one who thought in terms of strategy and survival. She had the bearing of someone who had learned early that the world was not kind to those who trusted too easily. Yuki, while not naive, carried a warmth that her sister had learned to bury. She smiled more readily, laughed more easily, and several times during the conversation, Kenji caught her watching him with an expression he could not quite interpret. When the briefing was complete, Hana refilled their teacups and the conversation shifted to more personal matters. "Tell us about yourself, Kenji-san," Yuki said. "We know you served Lord Yamamoto and that you survived a battle that took his life. But who were you before that? Where do you come from?" Kenji hesitated. He had spent 3 years trying to forget his past, trying to become no one. But these women would be living under the same roof, would be depending on him for their safety. Perhaps they deserved to know something of the man who held their lives in his hands. "I was born in a small village in Musashi province," he began slowly. "My father was a farmer, my mother a weaver. I had 2 younger sisters. When I was 12, bandits attacked our village during harvest season. Many were killed, including my family. I survived by hiding in a rice barrel." He paused, the memory still sharp after more than 20 years. Yuki's hand moved as if to reach for his, then stopped, hovering in the air between them before retreating. "Lord Yamamoto's samurai arrived the next day," Kenji continued. "They drove off the remaining bandits and offered to take any survivors to the castle. Most of the villagers refused, too frightened to leave their homes. But I had nothing left to stay for, so I went with them. Lord Yamamoto saw something in me, some potential, and he allowed me to train with his other samurai. I spent the next 15 years learning the way of the sword, the code of Bushido, everything that makes a samurai worthy of the name. And then he died," Hana said softly. "And then he died. We were ambushed during a night march. The Ikeda clan had better intelligence than we realized. They knew our route, our numbers, everything. The battle was chaos. I fought beside Lord Yamamoto until an arrow took him in the chest. His last command to me was to survive, to carry word of what had happened back to his family. But by the time I reached his castle, his brother had already taken control and blamed me for the death. I was declared Ronin and cast out. His last command was for you to survive," Yuki repeated, her voice gentle but firm. "Then you did not fail him, Kenji-san. You obeyed." Kenji looked at her, surprised. No one had ever framed it that way before. He had always seen his survival as the ultimate failure, the breaking of the samurai code that demanded death before dishonor. But Yuki's words suggested a different interpretation, one where obedience to his lord's final command was itself a form of honor. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but I have carried the shame of it nonetheless." "Shame is a choice," Hana said. "You can carry it forever, or you can set it down and walk forward unburdened. Lord Takeda has given you a chance to do the latter. Will you take it?" It was a question that demanded honesty. Kenji thought about it, really thought about it, examining his own heart, with the same care he would examine a blade for imperfections. "I will try," he said finally. "I cannot promise to forget what happened, but I can promise to move forward, to protect you both with everything I have learned, everything I am. That much I can do." Yuki smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That is all we ask." The conversation drifted to lighter topics after that. They discussed the schedule for the coming week, the various engagements planned, the logistics of travel and accommodation. As they talked, Kenji began to notice small things about the sisters, details that revealed the depth of their bond, the way Hana would start a sentence and Yuki would finish it, as if they shared thoughts as well as blood. The way they moved in unconscious harmony, reaching for the teapot at the same moment, adjusting their positions to mirror each other. The way they protected each other, Hana with strategic thinking and Yuki with emotional intelligence, 2 halves of a complete whole. It made Kenji think of his own sisters, lost so long ago that he could barely remember their faces, but he remembered the feeling of being part of something larger than himself, of being connected to others in a way that transcended words. He had not felt that way in years. As the night deepened and the lanterns burned lower, Hana stifled a yawn and rose gracefully. "Forgive us, Kenji-san, but we must retire. Tomorrow we have an early engagement at Lord Matsudaira's estate, and we will need to prepare. You should rest as well." Kenji stood and bowed. "Thank you for your hospitality and your trust. I will not disappoint you." "We know," Yuki said, and there was such certainty in her voice that Kenji almost believed it himself. He descended the stairs to his room, his mind full of the evening's conversation. As he prepared his sleeping mat and laid out his katana within easy reach, he reflected on how strange it was that his life had changed so completely in less than 24 hours. Yesterday he had been no one, nothing, a ghost drifting through existence. Today he had purpose, duty, and something else he was almost afraid to name: connection, the beginning of belonging. But as he lay in the darkness, listening to the soft sounds of the house settling around him, Kenji could not shake a feeling of unease. Things had happened too quickly, too smoothly. Lord Takeda's verdict had seemed almost generous, and the sisters' acceptance of him had been warmer than he deserved. In his experience, when things seemed too good to be true, it was because they were. The world of feudal Japan was not kind to Ronin, and the path from disgrace to redemption was never straight or easy. There would be tests ahead, challenges that would require more than skill with a sword. And somewhere in the shadows, threats were forming, dangers that would test not just his ability to protect, but his ability to maintain the distance that duty required. He thought of Yuki's smile, of the warmth in her eyes, and felt a stirring of something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Not just attraction, though that was part of it, but something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. The sense that she saw him not as a failure or a tool, but as a person worthy of being seen. It was dangerous, that feeling. Dangerous because it made him vulnerable, made him care about more than mere survival. A samurai who cared too much could be manipulated, could be made to choose between duty and desire. And that choice, Kenji knew, was where honor went to die. He would have to be careful, would have to maintain boundaries, keep his distance, remember always that he was here to protect, not to love. The sisters were beautiful and kind, but they were also Lord Takeda's property, and Kenji was merely the sword that stood between them and harm. That was his duty, that was his purpose. Nothing more. But as sleep finally claimed him, his last conscious thought was of Yuki's voice saying, "Perhaps we can become friends, not just protector and protected, but something more." And in the darkness, Kenji smiled, even though he knew he should not, even though he knew the danger of hope, even though he knew that in the world of feudal Japan, where power and politics ruled all, a Ronin and a Geisha could never be more than what they were. But perhaps for just a moment, he could allow himself to dream otherwise. The cherry trees in the garden swayed in the night breeze, their blossoms beginning to open, beautiful and fragile, and doomed to fall. And in his room, Kenji slept and dreamed of things that could never be, while the wheel of fate turned slowly toward the challenges that awaited them all. 3 weeks passed like water flowing over stones, smooth and steady, carving new channels in the landscape of Kenji's life. He fell into the rhythm of his duties with the discipline of his training, rising before dawn to practice his forms in the garden, standing guard during the sisters' preparations, accompanying them to gatherings throughout Kyoto, and returning late at night to write detailed reports for Lord Takeda about any potential threats or useful information overheard. The work was demanding but not difficult. Most of the gatherings were peaceful affairs, where powerful men discussed politics and poetry over sake and the sisters' graceful performances. Kenji remained in the background, a silent presence that most guests barely noticed, his hand never far from his katana, his eyes constantly scanning for danger. But the real challenge was not the external threats. It was the internal one, the one that grew stronger with each passing day, despite his best efforts to suppress it. He was falling in love with them, with both of them. It had started innocently enough, small conversations in the morning over tea, discussions of literature and philosophy that revealed the depth of their education, shared meals where Yuki would insist he try some delicacy she had prepared, her eyes lighting up when he praised her cooking, quiet evenings when Hana would read poetry aloud, her voice turning the ancient words into living things that hung in the air like incense smoke. Hana had a mind like a blade, sharp and precise. She played strategy games with Kenji, teaching him the complex rules of Go while simultaneously schooling him in the intricate dance of court politics. She challenged him, pushed him to think beyond the simple binary of duty and honor, showed him that the world was full of gray spaces where right and wrong were not always clear. Yuki was different. Where Hana was sharp, Yuki was soft. Where Hana analyzed, Yuki felt. She had a gift for reading emotions, for knowing when Kenji was troubled even before he knew it himself. She would appear with tea when he was stressed, would suggest a walk in the garden when he had been standing guard too long, would ask questions that gently drew out the parts of himself he had kept locked away. Between them they were complete, and somehow, impossibly, they were drawing him into their completeness. making him part of something he had no right to join. The dangerous part was that they seemed to be falling for him as well. It manifested in small ways at first, the way Yuki would touch his arm when making a point, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. The way Hana would seek his opinion on matters that had nothing to do with security, valuing his judgment as if he were an advisor rather than a guard. The way both of them had started inviting him to join them for meals in their sitting room rather than having him eat alone in his quarters. Kenji knew he should refuse these intimacies, should maintain professional distance. But he was weak. After 3 years of isolation, of being treated as less than human by a world that had no use for masterless samurai, the warmth of their affection was like sunlight to a man who had lived too long in shadow. He could no more resist it than he could resist breathing. The breaking point came on a warm evening in early summer, after they had returned from a particularly tense gathering at the estate of Lord Matsudaira, one of Lord Takeda's political rivals. The gathering had been ostensibly peaceful, a celebration of the summer season, but Kenji had sensed undercurrents of hostility, had seen the way certain samurai watched the sisters with calculating eyes. Most concerning had been the presence of Lord Akimoto, the northern daimyo whom the sisters had warned him about. Akimoto was a large man in his 50s, with a face that spoke of too much sake and too little restraint. He had spent most of the evening monopolizing Hana's attention, his conversation growing more forward as the night progressed, his implications more crude. Kenji had remained nearby, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to maintain the illusion of non-interference. But when Akimoto had reached for Hana's hand, had pulled her closer despite her subtle resistance, Kenji had stepped forward. Just one step, but it was enough. Akimoto had looked up and seen Kenji standing there, his hand resting lightly on his katana, his eyes cold and absolutely certain. The daimyo had released Hana immediately and laughed it off as a misunderstanding, but his eyes had promised retribution, had marked Kenji as an obstacle to be removed. Now, back at the residence, the three of them sat in the upper room, the tension of the evening still vibrating in the air like a struck bell. "Thank you," Hana said quietly, "for being there, for stopping him without causing an incident." Kenji bowed his head. "That is my duty." "It was more than duty," Yuki said softly. She was sitting closer to him than usual, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of cherry blossoms in her hair. "I saw your face, Kenji-san. You were not just protecting Lord Takeda's property. You were protecting someone you care about." The words hung in the air, dangerous and true. Kenji knew he should deny them, should retreat behind the wall of formality and duty, but he was tired of lying, tired of pretending that his heart was not betraying him with every breath. "I have tried not to care," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know that what I feel is inappropriate, that it violates the boundaries of my position, but I cannot help it. These weeks with you both have been the happiest of my life, and I fear that I have forgotten where the line between duty and desire should be drawn." Silence fell, heavy and expectant. Kenji kept his eyes lowered, afraid of what he might see in their faces. Disgust, perhaps, or worse, pity, the confession of a lonely man who had misread kindness for something more. Then he felt a hand on his, warm and small. He looked up and saw Yuki, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You are not alone in forgetting that line," she said. "We have crossed it as well, both of us." Hana moved to sit on his other side, her usual composure cracking to reveal something raw and vulnerable beneath. "We did not expect this, Kenji-san. We have been trained since childhood to separate our feelings from our duties, to smile and entertain, and never let our hearts become involved. But you came into our lives like a stone thrown into still water, and the ripples have reached places we thought were unreachable." "I am not worthy," Kenji said, the old shame rising up. "I am a Ronin, a failure, a man with no honor. You are both educated, refined, beautiful. I have nothing to offer you but a sword and a past full of ghosts." "You have more than that," Yuki said firmly. "You have courage, you have integrity. You have a heart that still believes in protecting others, even after the world has given you every reason to look away. That is worth more than land or title, or any of the things that men measure themselves by." Hana took his other hand so that he sat between them, connected to both. "We know this is impossible. We know that Lord Takeda would never allow a relationship between his geisha and their guardian. We know that if our feelings became known, you would be executed and we would be punished. We know all of this, and yet we cannot stop what we feel." Kenji's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest. He was holding hands with two women who belonged to a powerful daimyo, was sitting in intimacy that could get them all killed. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at him to pull away, to restore distance, to remember his place. But he did not pull away. "What do we do?" he asked, directing the question to both of them. "How do we navigate this?" The sisters exchanged a long look, that silent communication that passed between them like shared breath. Then Hana spoke, her voice steady, despite the tremor Kenji could feel in her hand. "We are careful. We are discreet. We take what happiness we can in the moments we have, and we accept that those moments may be all we ever have. We do not speak of it outside this room. We do not let it interfere with our duties, and we prepare ourselves for the possibility that this will end badly, because in the world we inhabit, stories like ours rarely have happy endings. But we have this moment," Yuki added, squeezing his hand gently. "We have now. And perhaps if we are very careful and very lucky, we can have more moments, small stolen pieces of happiness that we can gather like flowers before winter comes." Kenji looked from one to the other, seeing his own fear and hope reflected in their faces. He knew this was madness, knew that he was risking not just his life but theirs as well, knew that if Lord Takeda discovered what was growing between them, the consequences would be swift and terrible. But he also knew that he could not walk away. Not now. Not after tasting what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to be loved not for what he could do, but for who he was. "Then we will be careful," he said, "and we will cherish these moments, however many or few we are given. But I must ask you both to understand something. If we are discovered, if a choice must be made between my life and yours, I will not hesitate. I will die to protect you, and I will die gladly, knowing that I spent my last days as something more than a ghost." "No," Hana said fiercely. "We survive together or not at all. That is the only condition we accept." Yuki nodded in agreement. "We are three now, Kenji-san. Not two who are protected and one who protects. Three who protect each other." Something shifted in the room, some fundamental change in the nature of what they were to each other. It was not a marriage, not in any formal sense. There would be no ceremony, no public acknowledgement, but it was a commitment nonetheless, spoken in whispers and sealed with clasped hands, a promise made in defiance of the world and its rules. They sat together in silence for a long time, simply holding hands, drawing strength from the connection. Outside, night deepened over Kyoto, and in the garden, the cherry blossoms had begun to fall, their brief season of beauty ending as all beautiful things must end. But inside, in that small room lit by paper lanterns, three people who had been alone had found each other, and for that moment, that precious, fragile moment, it was enough. The weeks that followed were among the strangest and most intense of Kenji's life. By day, they maintained perfect propriety. He was the guardian, they were the protected. They spoke formally, moved in prescribed patterns, observed all the rituals of their respective positions. To any observer, nothing had changed. But at night, after the servants had retired and the guards were focused on external threats, the three of them would meet in the upper room. They would talk for hours, sharing stories and dreams, revealing parts of themselves that the world never saw. They would sit close, sometimes holding hands, sometimes merely existing in each other's presence, drawing comfort from proximity. They never went further than that. The sisters were still Lord Takeda's property, and to fully consummate what they felt would be to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. They lived in the space between desire and fulfillment, in the tension of what could be, but was not yet. And in that space, they found a strange kind of happiness. Kenji learned things about them he had never known. He learned that Hana dreamed of freedom, of a life where she could make her own choices, rather than existing as a beautiful object in someone else's collection. He learned that Yuki wrote poetry in secret, verses that she had never shown anyone, because they revealed too much of her inner self. He learned that both of them had been sold to the Geisha house by impoverished parents when they were children, that they had never known any life but this one, and that despite its privileges, it was still a form of captivity. They learned about him as well, about the nightmares that woke him some nights, dreams of his master falling while Kenji stood helpless, about his love of philosophy and his secret belief that the rigid codes of Bushido, while necessary, sometimes demanded sacrifices that served no one, about his fear that he would fail them as he had failed before, that his presence in their lives would bring only pain. "You will not fail us," Yuki said one night after Kenji had confessed this fear, "because we will not let you. We are stronger together than any of us are alone. And she was right. As the days passed, Kenji found that his confidence was growing, that the weight of his past failures was becoming lighter. Not gone, never gone, but manageable, balanced by the present, by the reality of connection and purpose. But all the while, danger was circling closer. Lord Akimoto had not forgotten the incident at Lord Matsudaira's estate. Kenji began to notice the northern daimyo's samurai appearing at gatherings where the sisters performed, watching with calculating eyes, taking note of patterns and vulnerabilities. Twice, Kenji spotted the same man following them through the streets of Kyoto, always staying just far enough back to maintain plausible deniability. He reported these incidents to Lord Takeda in his monthly meetings, and the daimyo listened with his usual impassive expression. But Kenji sensed that Lord Takeda was troubled, that he recognized the signs of a threat forming. Lord Akimoto is ambitious, Lord Takeda said during one such meeting. He seeks to expand his influence in this region, and he views my geisha as tools he can use toward that end, either by acquiring them himself or by using them to embarrass me. You must be even more vigilant, Kenji. I sense that something is coming, some move he is planning. I will not let him succeed, my lord. See that you do not. Because if Hana or Yuki come to harm, it will not just be your life that is forfeit. It will be your name, your memory, everything you ever were or might have been. You will be erased so completely that it will be as if you never existed. The threat was clear, and Kenji accepted it without flinching. He had known the stakes from the beginning. What Lord Takeda did not know, what he could never know, was that Kenji's motivation for protecting the sisters had evolved beyond simple duty. He was no longer guarding Lord Takeda's property. He was protecting the women he loved, and he would die before he let anything happen to them. The crisis came on a humid evening in midsummer, during a gathering at a villa on the outskirts of Kyoto. It was meant to be a small affair, a private entertainment for a visiting diplomat from China and his retinue. Hana and Yuki were to perform together, a rare occurrence that always drew extra attention. Kenji had a bad feeling about the gathering from the start. The villa was isolated, surrounded by forest, with too many approaches and not enough guards. He had expressed his concerns to the sisters, but the engagement had been arranged by Lord Takeda himself, and there was no refusing it. They arrived at sunset, when the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. The villa was elegant, its gardens immaculately maintained, but Kenji could not shake his unease. He positioned himself in the outer chamber, where he could watch both the performance room and the entrance, his hand never straying far from his katana. The evening began normally enough. The diplomat was an educated man who appreciated the sisters' artistry, who asked intelligent questions about their music and dance. Other guests arrived, minor nobles and merchants, all of them behaving with proper decorum. Then Lord Akimoto arrived. He came with 6 of his samurai, all of them armed and carrying themselves with the swagger of men who believed themselves above consequence. Akimoto's face was flushed with drink, and his eyes went immediately to where Hana and Yuki sat, preparing for their next performance. Kenji felt every muscle in his body tense. This was wrong. Akimoto had not been on the guest list. His presence here was no accident. The northern daimyo made his way directly to the sisters. Ignoring the other guests, his attention fixed with the focus of a hunter who has cornered his prey. He sat down heavily beside Hana, close enough that she had to shift away to maintain proper distance. "The beautiful flowers of Lord Takeda's garden," Akimoto said loudly, his words slurring slightly. "I have been thinking about our last encounter, Lady Hana, thinking about how rudely we were interrupted." Hana's face remained composed, but Kenji could see the tension in her shoulders. "My lord is too kind to remember such a trifling matter. May I offer you tea?" "I do not want tea," Akimoto said, his hand reaching out to grasp her wrist. "I want you to understand something. Lord Takeda keeps you locked away like treasures in a vault, but treasures are meant to be possessed, and I mean to possess you, both of you." Yuki moved closer to her sister, and Kenji saw fear flash across her face before she mastered it. "Lord Akimoto, we are honored by your interest, but such matters are for Lord Takeda to decide. We have no authority to—" "Lord Takeda is a fool," Akimoto interrupted, his grip tightening on Hana's wrist until Kenji could see her wince. "He wastes your potential on politics and poetry, when you could be serving a real man, bearing sons who would unite our territories. I have been patient, have made offers, have played by his rules, but my patience is at an end." He pulled Hana toward him, and that was when Kenji moved. He crossed the space between the outer chamber and the performance room in 3 strides, his presence suddenly filling the doorway like a gathering storm. Every eye in the room turned to him, and the conversations died mid-word. "Release her," Kenji said, his voice quiet, but carrying the absolute certainty of drawn steel. Akimoto looked up, his face twisting with rage. "The dog who guards the flowers thinks he can bark at his betters. Do you know who I am, Ronin?" "I know exactly who you are," Kenji replied, "and I know that you are hurting a woman under my protection. That is all that matters." For a moment everything balanced on a knife's edge. Akimoto's 6 samurai had risen, their hands moving toward their weapons. The other guests were backing away, recognizing the signs of violence about to erupt. The Chinese diplomat looked alarmed, clearly not expecting his peaceful evening to turn into a potential bloodbath. Then Akimoto smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Very well, I release her, but understand this, dog. I will have these women, if not through negotiation, then through other means. And you who stand in my way will be removed. That is not a threat. That is a promise." He stood, releasing Hana's wrist, and walked toward Kenji. He stopped mere inches away, close enough that Kenji could smell the sake on his breath. "I know about you," Akimoto said softly, so only Kenji could hear. "I know you are Ronin, masterless and dishonored. I know you failed your lord and lived when you should have died, and I know that Lord Takeda keeps you only because you are useful. But when you cease to be useful, when you become more trouble than you are worth, he will cast you aside like the garbage you are. Remember that, when you decide whether to stand in my way again." Then he turned and strode from the villa, his samurai following in his wake. The gathered guests began to murmur, the evening's entertainment clearly over. Kenji remained standing in the doorway, his heart pounding, his hand still resting on his katana. He had just made an enemy of a powerful daimyo. The consequences of that would come soon enough. But when he looked at Hana and Yuki, saw them sitting together with Yuki gently massaging her sister's bruised wrist, saw the gratitude and relief in their eyes when they looked at him, he knew he would make the same. Choice again. Some things were worth dying for, and the women he loved were at the top of that list. The journey back to the residence was quiet and tense. Kenji rode in the carriage with the sisters, breaking protocol, but no one questioned it. They all knew that something had shifted, that the careful balance they had been maintaining was beginning to fracture. When they arrived home, Hana dismissed the servants, and the 3 of them went directly to the upper room. Only when the door was closed and they were alone did the sisters' composure finally break. Yuki threw her arms around Kenji, holding him tightly. "He will try to kill you," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "You embarrassed him in front of witnesses. He cannot let that stand." "Let him try," Kenji said, though his heart was heavy with the knowledge that she was right. "I will face whatever comes." Hana, still cradling her bruised wrist, looked at him with eyes that held both gratitude and sorrow. "This is our fault. We have drawn you into our world, made you care about us, and now you are in danger because of it." Kenji gently disentangled himself from Yuki and knelt before both sisters, taking their hands in his. "You did not draw me anywhere. I chose this. I chose to save you that night in the rain. I chose to accept Lord Takeda's offer. And I chose to let my heart open to you both despite knowing the risks. These were my choices, and I would make them again. Even if they lead to your death," Hana asked softly. "Especially then," Kenji replied, "because a life lived in service to something greater than oneself is the only life worth living. My old master taught me that. I forgot it for a while, lost in my shame and guilt. But you both reminded me. You gave me purpose again. You gave me something to protect, something to believe in, so yes, even if this path leads to my death, I will walk it gladly." They sat together in the lamplight, 3 people bound by love and threatened by the world that sought to keep them apart. Outside, the summer night was warm and full of cicadas singing their ancient songs. Inside, they held each other and drew strength from their connection, knowing that the time for hiding was ending, that the storm Akimoto represented was gathering strength, and that soon they would have to face it together. But for now, for this one precious night, they had each other, and that would have to be enough. The attack came 3 nights later, under a moonless sky that made the world seem carved from shadow and silence. Kenji woke to the whisper of sandals on wood, a sound so faint that only his years of training allowed him to hear it at all. He was on his feet in an instant, his katana already in his hand, his body moving on pure instinct, even before his mind had fully processed the danger. 6 men in dark clothing were moving through the residence, their faces covered, their movements coordinated. Assassins, professionals hired to complete a task quickly and quietly. Kenji knew immediately who had sent them. Lord Akimoto had made his move. The first assassin came through his door, blade already raised for a killing strike. Kenji met him in the darkness, his katana singing as it deflected the attack and opened a red line across the man's chest. The assassin fell without a sound, and Kenji was already moving toward the stairs, toward where the sisters slept. 2 more assassins were ascending the staircase, moving toward the upper floor where Hana and Yuki's rooms were located. Kenji took the steps 3 at a time, his katana a blur of motion. The first assassin turned too late, Kenji's blade catching him in the throat. The second managed to parry the initial strike, but Kenji's training was far superior. Within 3 exchanges, the man was disarmed and falling backward down the stairs. Kenji burst through the door to the upper hallway and found 2 assassins already at the sisters' door, one of them working at the lock, while the other stood guard. The guard turned and threw a knife, a flash of steel in the darkness. Kenji twisted, feeling the blade pass so close it cut through his kimono and drew blood along his ribs. Then he was on them, fury and fear driving him forward with inhuman speed. His katana moved through the patterns his master had taught him, techniques refined over centuries, the deadly art of the samurai distilled into motion too fast to follow. Both assassins fell, and Kenji kicked open the door to the sisters' room. Hana and Yuki were awake, huddled together in the center of the room, a small tanto dagger clutched in Hana's hand. Relief flooded their faces when they saw Kenji, but he had no time to reassure them. "Stay here," he commanded. "Lock the door behind me and do not open it for anyone but me." "Kenji," Yuki started, but he was already gone, moving back into the hallway. The 6th assassin was coming down from the roof, having found another way into the residence. He was larger than the others, moved with more confidence. The leader, Kenji realized, the one who would be hardest to kill. They met in the hallway, and the clash of their blades shattered the night's silence. This assassin was skilled, trained in a style that Kenji recognized as coming from the northern provinces, Akimoto's territory. The confirmation of what Kenji already knew should have angered him, but instead he felt only cold clarity. They fought in the narrow hallway, their blades creating sparks when they met, their movements constrained by the tight space. The assassin was strong and fast, but Kenji had something the other man lacked. He was not fighting for money or duty or pride. He was fighting for love, and that made him unstoppable. The fight lasted perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. When it ended, the assassin lay dead at Kenji's feet, and Kenji stood breathing hard, blood dripping from the wound in his side, and a dozen smaller cuts he had not even felt receiving. The residence erupted into chaos. Guards were shouting, servants were crying out, lanterns were being lit throughout the building. Kenji stood in the hallway, his katana still drawn and dripping blood, and waited for what would come next. What came was Lord Takeda himself, arriving within the hour with 20 armed samurai. The Daimyo surveyed the scene with cold eyes, taking in the 6 dead assassins, the blood on the floor, and Kenji standing like a statue amid the carnage. "Report," Lord Takeda commanded. Kenji sheathed his blade and bowed, then explained the attack in precise, emotionless terms. He detailed every moment, every decision, leaving out nothing except the depth of his feelings for the women he had protected. When he finished, Lord Takeda was silent for a long moment. Then he walked through the residence, examining the bodies, noting their equipment and their positions. Finally, he returned to where Kenji stood. "These men are from the north," Lord Takeda said, "from Lord Akimoto's territory. This is an act of war, thinly disguised as banditry. He has moved against me directly, using my geisha as his target. Yes, my lord, he must have known that you would be here, that you would resist, yet he sent only 6 men." Lord Takeda's eyes narrowed. "Either he underestimated you, or this attack had a different purpose, a test perhaps, or a message." Kenji had considered the same thing. 6 skilled assassins should have been enough to overwhelm a single guard and kill 2 unarmed women. That they had failed spoke to either poor intelligence or deliberate inadequacy. Perhaps Akimoto had wanted to provoke a response, wanted to draw Lord Takeda into open conflict. "What are your orders, my lord?" Kenji asked. "First, you will have those wounds tended. You are no use to me dead." Lord Takeda gestured to one of his servants, who hurried forward with medical supplies. "Second, the sisters will be moved to my main residence outside Kyoto. They will remain there under heavy guard until this matter with Akimoto is resolved. Kenji felt his stomach tighten. Separated from Hana and Yuki? After tonight? After proving his ability to protect them? After everything they had built together? My lord, I respectfully request that I be allowed to accompany them. I am their guardian. My place is at their side. Your place is where I command it to be, Lord Takeda said sharply. Then his expression softened slightly. However, in this instance, your request aligns with my own thinking. You have proven your worth tonight, Kenji. You have shown skills that I can use in the conflicts ahead. Yes, you will accompany the sisters to my residence, but understand that the situation has changed. We are moving toward war with Akimoto, and you will be expected to do more than simply stand guard. Are you prepared for that? I am, my lord. Lord Takeda studied him for a long moment, and Kenji had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed, measured, and judged in ways he could not fully understand. Then the Daimyo nodded. Good. We leave at dawn. Prepare yourself and the sisters. As Lord Takeda departed to make arrangements, Kenji was finally allowed to go to the sisters' room. They opened the door at his knock and immediately pulled him inside, their faces pale but determined. We heard everything, Hana said, her hands shaking slightly as she began cleaning the blood from Kenji's wounds. 6 men. You killed them all. I did what was necessary, Kenji said, wincing as she applied medicine to the cut along his ribs. It was not deep, but it burned like fire. Yuki brought fresh cloth for bandages, her eyes never leaving Kenji's face. You saved us. Again, how many times must you risk your life for us before the debt is paid? There is no debt, Kenji said softly. There is only love, and love does not keep ledgers. The words hung in the air the first time any of them had used that word directly. Hana's hands stilled on his bandages, and Yuki's eyes filled with tears. Love, Hana repeated, as if testing the word. Yes, that is what this is it not? Not duty, not obligation. Love. We love you, Yuki said, her voice breaking. Both of us. We know it is impossible, know that the world will never allow it, but we cannot help what we feel. Kenji reached out and drew them both close, feeling their warmth, their aliveness, the precious reality of their presence. Then we will love impossibly, he said. We will love in defiance of the world and its rules. And if the price for that love is everything we have, then I will pay it gladly. They sat together in the pre-dawn darkness, 3 hearts beating as one, knowing that the morning would bring change, would carry them away from this place where they had found each other. But they also knew that wherever they went, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. When dawn came, it brought Lord Takeda's carriage and an escort of 30 samurai. The sisters were dressed in traveling clothes, their few possessions packed, their painted faces composed despite the fear Kenji could sense beneath the surface. He rode beside the carriage, his wounds freshly bandaged, his katana cleaned and sharpened, his eyes scanning constantly for threats. The journey to Lord Takeda's main residence took 2 days, following roads that wound through forests and across rivers, passing through villages where farmers stopped their work to bow as the daimyo's procession passed. At night, they stayed in fortified way stations where security could be maintained, where Kenji slept with his hand on his sword and woke at every sound. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, they arrived at Lord Takeda's castle, a massive structure that dominated a hilltop overlooking the surrounding countryside. Its walls were thick stone, its gates reinforced iron, its towers manned by archers whose eyes tracked every approach. It was a fortress built to withstand siege, a statement of power that needed no words. The sisters were given rooms in the inner keep, apartments far more luxurious than their residence in Kyoto, but also far more confining. Guards stood at every entrance, and the windows looked out over sheer drops that would kill anyone foolish enough to attempt escape. It was protection, yes, but it was also a cage. Kenji was housed in the samurai barracks, a long building where Lord Takeda's warriors lived in Spartan efficiency. He was given a small room to himself, a recognition of his special status as the sisters' guardian, but he was now surrounded by dozens of other samurai, all of whom watched him with the suspicion reserved for outsiders. The first week passed in a blur of routine. Kenji was allowed to visit the sisters twice daily, morning and evening, to ensure their safety and well-being. But their conversations were always observed, always formal, the intimacy they had shared in Kyoto replaced by careful distance. They communicated through glances and subtle gestures, finding ways to express what they could not say aloud. Kenji learned that Lord Takeda was preparing for war. Messengers arrived daily from allied Daimyo, and the castle's forges worked day and night producing weapons and armor. The conflict with Lord Akimoto was escalating from shadow war to open hostility, and everyone in the castle could feel the tension building. On the 9th day after their arrival, Kenji was summoned to Lord Takeda's private council chamber. He entered to find the daimyo seated with 3 of his senior advisors, maps spread across the table before them. "Kenji," Lord Takeda said without preamble, "I have a task for you, one that will require all your skills as a warrior and your knowledge of the sisters. I am at your service, my lord. Lord Akimoto has been making inquiries. His spies have learned that Hana and Yuki are here in my fortress. He has sent word through intermediaries that he wishes to discuss terms for peace, a meeting on neutral ground to resolve our differences before they escalate further. I do not believe him. I believe this is a trap designed to either assassinate me or capture the sisters, but I must attend nonetheless, or appear weak before the other daimyo who are watching this conflict." Lord Takeda stood and walked to the window, his back to the room. "The meeting will take place in 5 days at an old shrine in the mountains between our territories. I will bring 20 samurai. Akimoto will bring the same, but I suspect he will also bring hidden forces, men concealed in the forest waiting to strike. Your task is to find them first." Kenji felt his pulse quicken. "You want me to scout ahead, to identify the ambush before it can be sprung? More than that, I want you to lead a small team of my best men and eliminate the threat before the meeting begins. If Akimoto brings additional forces, they will die in the forest before they can interfere. If he truly comes in peace, then no harm is done." "But I do not believe in his peace, Kenji, and neither, I think, do you." "No, my lord, I do not." "Good." Lord Takeda turned back, his eyes hard. "You leave tomorrow at dawn. You will have 5 men under your command, warriors I trust absolutely. You will move through the forest, find Akimoto's hidden forces if they exist, and remove them, quietly if possible, loudly if necessary. The meeting must be secure or I will appear weak, and weakness in this world is death." Kenji bowed deeply. "I will not fail you, my lord. See that you do not. Because if I die in that forest, if Akimoto succeeds in his treachery, the sisters will be defenseless. He will claim them as spoils of war, and there will be no one to stop him. Your duty to protect them extends beyond their physical presence. It extends to ensuring that I survive to keep them safe." The weight of that responsibility settled on Kenji's shoulders like armor, heavy but familiar. He had been given more than a mission. He had been given the fate of the women he loved, placed in his hands and told not to drop it. "I understand, my lord." That evening, Kenji was allowed a final visit to the sisters before his departure. They sat in their rooms, surrounded by guards who stood just far enough away to give the illusion of privacy, and Kenji explained what was to come. Hana listened with her usual composure, but Kenji could see the fear in her eyes. "This is dangerous. You are walking into a forest where enemies may lurk behind every tree, where a single mistake could mean your death." "I am a samurai," Kenji said simply. "Danger is my constant companion." "But you are our samurai," Yuki said softly, "and we cannot bear the thought of losing you." Kenji looked at them both, memorizing every detail of their faces, the way the lamplight caught in their hair, the way they sat together with the unconscious unity of twins or lovers. He wanted to hold them, to express physically what he felt in his heart, but the guards were watching, and even this much closeness was risky. "I will return," he promised. "I will complete this mission, ensure Lord Takeda's safety, and come back to you. This I swear." "Swear it on something that matters," Hana said, her voice intense. "Swear it on your blade. Swear it on your honor. Swear it on us." Kenji drew his katana and laid it across his palms, holding it between himself and the sisters. "I swear by this blade, by the honor of my name, and by my love for you both, that I will return. Death itself will not keep me from you." They reached out together and placed their hands on the blade, completing the oath, binding all 3 of them to its fulfillment. Then Kenji resheathed his katana, bowed deeply, and left before his resolve could break. That night, he did not sleep. He sat in his room and performed the rituals of preparation that his old master had taught him. He cleaned and sharpened his blade until it could split falling leaves. He meditated on death, accepting it as a possibility while refusing to surrender to it. He wrote letters to the sisters, words he hoped they would never need to read, expressing everything his heart contained. When dawn came, he was ready. The 5 warriors assigned to him were hard men, veterans of countless battles, their faces scarred and their eyes cold. but they accepted his command without question, recognizing in Kenji the bearing of a true samurai despite his Ronin past. They departed the castle as the sun rose, moving quickly and quietly through terrain that grew increasingly wild as they approached the mountains. For 2 days they traveled, sleeping in shifts, eating dried food, speaking only when necessary. Kenji led them using every skill he had learned during his years of wandering, reading the forest like a language, spotting the signs of human passage that others would miss. On the 3rd day, they found what they were looking for. Hidden in a ravine 2 miles from the shrine where the meeting was to take place, Lord Akimoto had assembled a force of at least 40 samurai. They were camped in a defensive position, clearly waiting for some signal to move. Kenji and his men observed from the ridgeline above, counting numbers and assessing weaknesses. "We cannot take 40 men with 6, one of Kenji's warriors whispered. "We should return and report." "There is no time," Kenji replied. "The meeting is tomorrow. If we leave to report, Akimoto's forces will move into position before we can return. We must act now." "How?" another warrior asked. "We are outnumbered nearly 7 to 1. Kenji studied the ravine, noting the narrow entrance, the steep walls, the single path that led down to where the camp was located. An idea began to form, dangerous and desperate, but possible. "We do not fight them," he said. "We trap them. Look at the ravine walls. They are unstable, loose rock held in place by roots and vegetation. If we start a rock slide at the entrance, we can seal them inside. Then we set fires at the exit points. Smoke and fire will force them out, but the rock slide will prevent escape. They will be trapped until Lord Takeda's forces can arrive to accept their surrender." The warriors looked at each other, recognizing the audacity of the plan. It was risky, required perfect timing, and depended on the ravine's geology cooperating, but it was also the only option that did not involve a suicidal direct assault. "It could work," the eldest warrior said finally. "But someone will need to remain at the entrance to trigger the rock slide at the right moment. That person will be exposed, will likely die when Akimoto's men realize what is happening." "I will do it," Kenji said immediately. "No," the warrior protested. "You are our commander. Let one of us—" "I am the one who swore an oath to protect those I love," Kenji interrupted. "I am the one who will ensure this mission succeeds, even if it costs me everything. That is my choice, and it is final. Now move. We have work to do." They spent the rest of the day in preparation. The warriors positioned themselves at the exit points of the ravine, ready to start fires when the signal came. Kenji remained at the entrance, studying the rock face, identifying the key points where force would need to be applied to trigger collapse. When night fell, he began his work. Using rope and his sword as leverage, he slowly weakened the crucial supporting structures, creating instability that would cascade with the right application of force. It was delicate, dangerous work, and twice he nearly fell when rock gave way beneath his feet. But by the time dawn approached, everything was ready. He waited in the grey light before sunrise, watching as Akimoto's forces began to stir. They would be moving soon, preparing to take up positions around the shrine. That was when he would strike. The first warriors emerged from the ravine, and Kenji applied force to the final support point. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like thunder, the entire rock face began to move. The warriors below shouted in alarm as tons of stone and earth cascaded down, sealing the entrance to the ravine. Those who had already emerged tried to run back to help their trapped comrades, but the rock slide was too massive, too fast. Within seconds, the entrance was completely blocked. Kenji saw the smoke beginning to rise from the exit points where his men had started their fires. The plan was working, but he also saw a dozen of Akimoto's warriors who had escaped the ravine, and they saw him standing on the ridge above, clearly responsible for what had just happened. They began to climb toward him, and Kenji knew his time had run out. He could have fled, could have retreated to where Lord Takeda's forces were gathering for the meeting. But if these warriors escaped, if they warned Akimoto that his trap had been discovered, the entire mission would be compromised. So Kenji stood his ground and drew his blade, as 12 warriors climbed toward him with murder in their eyes. The fight that followed would be remembered in song and story for generations, though Kenji would never hear those songs himself. He fought with everything he had learned in a lifetime of training, with all the skill his master had instilled in him, with the strength that came from knowing he was protecting those he loved. One warrior fell, then another, then a third. Kenji's katana moved through the patterns of combat like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance, turning force aside and redirecting it back toward its source. But he was one man against many, and even the greatest warrior cannot fight forever. A blade found his shoulder, opening a deep wound. Another caught his leg, sending him to one knee. He fought on, refusing to fall, refusing to surrender, because to fall was to fail, and to fail was to doom Hana and Yuki to a fate worse than death. He killed 4 more before his strength began to fade. Blood loss and exhaustion were taking their toll, and his movements were slowing. The remaining warriors sensed victory and pressed their attack. That was when Lord Takeda's forces arrived. 20 samurai came over the ridge at a run, having heard the sound of the rock slide and the clash of steel. They fell upon Akimoto's warriors like a storm, and the battle was over within minutes. The survivors were bound and disarmed, and Lord Takeda himself approached where Kenji had collapsed against a boulder. "Foolish," the daimyo said, but there was something like respect in his voice. "Brave and foolish. You should have retreated when you triggered the rock slide. Instead, you stayed to ensure none escaped." "Why?" Kenji looked up at his lord through vision beginning to dim at the edges. "Because I swore an oath to protect those I love, and I do not break my oaths." Lord Takeda was silent for a moment, studying the wounded Ronin who had thrown himself into impossible odds for the sake of duty and love. Then he nodded to his men. "Get him to the physician. I want him alive." The world faded to grey, and Kenji knew no more. He woke 3 days later in a room he did not recognize, his body wrapped in bandages, pain radiating from a dozen wounds. For a moment he panicked, thinking he had failed, that he had broken his oath to return. Then he heard a familiar voice. "He is waking. Quickly, bring water." Kenji turned his head slowly and saw Hana and Yuki sitting beside his bed, their faces drawn with worry and exhaustion. Relief flooded through him, so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "You are alive," Yuki said, her voice breaking. "We were so afraid. They brought you back barely breathing, covered in blood. The physician said he had never seen anyone survive such wounds." "Stubborn," Kenji managed to whisper, his throat dry. "Too stubborn to die when I promised to return." Hana helped him drink water, her hands gentle despite their trembling. "Lord Takeda came to see us. He told us what you did, how you faced 12 warriors alone to ensure his safety, how you nearly died protecting his interests." "Not his interests," Kenji said softly. I was protecting you. Everything I did was for you." They looked at each other, and in that moment the last barriers between them dissolved. Hana leaned down and kissed him gently, followed by Yuki, both of them expressing physically what words could not contain. "We love you," they said in unison, "now and forever." "And I love you," Kenji replied. "Both of you, equally and completely. I know it is impossible. Know that the world will never accept it, but I cannot help what I feel." "Then we will make the impossible possible," Hana said with sudden fierceness. "We will find a way." Over the next month, as Kenji slowly healed, they learned that Lord Takeda had prevailed in his conflict with Lord Akimoto. The northern daimyo's treachery had been exposed, his hidden forces captured, and the other regional lords had turned against him. Akimoto had been forced to retreat to his own territories, his influence shattered, his threat neutralized. Lord Takeda's power had grown as a result, and with it his generosity. He came to visit Kenji one afternoon, finding the Ronin sitting in the garden, still weak but recovering. "You served me well," the daimyo said without preamble. "You protected my interests, eliminated my enemy's advantage, and nearly died in the process. Such service deserves reward." "I require no reward, my lord," Kenji said. "I did only what duty demanded. Nevertheless, I am in your debt. Name what you desire, and if it is within my power, I will grant it." Kenji took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been hoping for, the opportunity he needed, but it was also dangerous, because what he was about to ask could be seen as an insult. "I want to marry them," he said quietly. "Both of them, Hana and Yuki. I know it is unconventional. Know that they are your property. Know that I am merely a Ronin you have taken into your service. But I love them, and they love me, and we wish to be joined in marriage." Lord Takeda's face was unreadable. Silence stretched between them, heavy and expectant. Kenji prepared himself for refusal, for punishment, perhaps even for execution. He had asked for the impossible, and impossible requests were often met with harsh consequences. Then Lord Takeda laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. "Do you think me blind, Kenji? Do you think I did not know what was growing between you and the sisters? I have eyes everywhere. I knew within a week of placing you in their household that feelings were developing. I said nothing because those feelings made you all more effective. Love is a powerful motivator, far stronger than mere duty. Kenji stared at his lord, shocked. You knew? I knew, and I approved, so long as it did not interfere with your duties, which it has not. In fact, your love for them has made you a better guardian, more dedicated, more willing to sacrifice. So yes, Kenji, I will grant your request, but on one condition. Name it, my lord. You will remain in my service, all three of you. You will be my vassal, formally and permanently, and the sisters will continue their duties as geisha when I require them. But you will be their husband, and they will be your wives. And any children born of your union will be raised as samurai in my household. This is my offer. Accept it, or walk away and return to being masterless. Choose. Kenji did not hesitate. I accept, my lord, gratefully and completely. Then it is done. I will have the arrangements made. The wedding will take place 1 month from today, when you have fully recovered. And Kenji, Lord Takeda's voice softened slightly, you have earned this happiness. Do not question it. Do not doubt that you deserve it. You failed your first lord, yes, but you have more than redeemed yourself in my service. Let the past rest. Embrace the future. The words struck something deep in Kenji's chest, loosening chains he had carried for so long they had become part of him. Thank you, my lord, for everything. Lord Takeda nodded and walked away, leaving Kenji alone in the garden with tears running down his face, tears of relief and joy and release. The wedding took place on a clear autumn day, when the maple trees had turned red and gold and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. It was a small ceremony, attended only by Lord Takeda and his closest advisors, held in a private shrine within the castle grounds. Kenji wore the formal kimono of a samurai, the Takeda crest displayed prominently on his chest. Hana and Yuki wore matching kimono in shades of white and silver, their hair adorned with autumn flowers. They stood together before the shrine, and as they spoke their vows, Kenji felt as if he had finally come home after years of wandering. I take you both as my wives, he said, his voice steady. I promise to protect you, to honor you, to love you until the end of my days. My sword is yours. My heart is yours. Everything I am and will ever be, I give to you freely. We take you as our husband, they responded in unison. We promise to stand with you, to support you, to love you without reservation or regret. Our lives are yours. Our hearts are yours. We are bound to you as surely as the earth is bound to the sky. And it was done. 3 people who should never have been together, who came from different worlds and carried different scars, were joined as one. Not through law or politics or any calculation of advantage, but through simple, impossible love. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Kenji served Lord Takeda faithfully, rising to become one of his most trusted commanders. Hana and Yuki continued their duties as geisha when required, but they also became wives and, eventually, mothers. They bore Kenji 3 children, beautiful and strong, who grew up in the castle learning the ways of honor and service. Kenji never forgot the night in the rain when he first saved the sisters, never forgot the moment when Lord Takeda offered him a choice, never forgot the battle in the mountains where he nearly died proving his worth. Those memories remained with him always, reminders of how close he had come to losing everything, how precious the life he had built truly was. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the world was still, the 3 of them would sit together in their rooms and remember. They would talk about the early days, about the fear and uncertainty, about the impossible love that had somehow become possible, and they would hold each other close, grateful for every moment, every breath, every heartbeat they shared, because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the battles won, or the honors earned, or the service rendered. What mattered was the love they had found in a world that tried to keep them apart, the connection that had transformed a failed Ronin and 2 captive geisha into a family bound by more than blood or duty. They had found each other in the darkness, and they had chosen to walk forward into the light together. And though the world outside might never understand, though their story might never be told in the halls of power or written in the histories of great men, it was real and true and beautiful, and that was enough. Years later, when Kenji was old and his hair had turned grey, when Hana and Yuki's beauty had matured into something even more striking than their youth, when their children had grown into warriors and artists and scholars of renown, he would sit in the garden and watch the cherry blossoms fall, He would remember a rainy night long ago, when a nameless Ronin had heard a cry for help and made a choice, and he would smile, knowing that every step that followed, every hardship and triumph, every moment of joy and sorrow, had led him to this place, this moment, this life. He had been broken and lost. He had been restored and found. And he had learned the greatest lesson a samurai could learn, that true honor was not found in dying for a lord or following a code, but in living for those you loved, in protecting what mattered most, in choosing the difficult path because it was the right path. The sword could cut through flesh and bone, could end life in an instant, but the heart, the vulnerable and impossible heart, was stronger than any blade. It could endure wounds that would kill the body. It could love in defiance of all logic and reason. It could transform three people from different worlds into one soul with three bodies. And in the end, it was the heart, not the sword, that won. Kenji died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 70, surrounded by his wives and children and grandchildren. His funeral was attended by hundreds, including Lord Takeda's son, who had succeeded his father and continued to honor the family that had served so faithfully. Hana and Yuki lived another 10 years after Kenji's death, never once considering remarrying, never once doubting that they had loved and been loved by the greatest man they would ever know. When they passed, within days of each other as twins sometimes do, they were buried beside their husband in a grove of cherry trees that bloomed every spring, and on their shared monument, carved in stone, were three simple words that told the whole story. Love conquers all. The rain would fall. The blossoms would bloom and fade. The world would turn and change and forget. But the love of a humble Ronin and two Geisha sisters would remain, eternal and unbreakable, a testament to the power of choosing hope over despair, connection over isolation, and love over all the forces that sought to keep them apart. They had been impossible, they had been real, and they had been enough.